Japan, a nation that didn't collapse, but stopped. 1. The most terrifying kind of decline. In modern history, very few nations collapse in explosions. Most of them decline quietly. No war, no riots, no banking system collapse. Just one day, the future stops expanding. Everything still functions, but nothing moves forward. Japan is the clearest example of this. A nation that did not fail, not poor, not chaotic, but stopped. Literally, standing still for nearly 30 years. 2. Japan was once a global dream. Japan was never a weak country. It once led the world. Japan in the 1970s to 80s. Superior technology, precision manufacturing, disciplined education, a stable society, a culture of extreme focus. The world studied Japan. The world feared Japan. At one point, many believed Japan's growth would surpass the United States. But then, Japan slowed. Not because it did things wrong, but because it did things right. For too long. Success creates stability. Stability prolonged creates stagnation. Stagnation prolonged kills evolutionary momentum. A nation can die from failure, but it can also die from success. 3. The root, a society that no longer wants children. Japan aged very quickly, not because of genetics, not because of nature, but because of culture, economics, and social expectations. Extreme work pressure, almost no personal time, one of the highest child-rearing costs in the world. Family culture says, you must be fully ready, fully stable, fully perfect before having children. The result is clear. Young people don't want to marry, or they marry very late. They have one child, or none at all. The young population shrinks, the elderly population expands, and when that happens, fewer workers, more people needing care. Social welfare costs rise every year. Revenue slows. Spending rises. This is where the debt spiral begins. 4. Japan made a very Japanese decision. Faced with a hard choice, cut welfare and let the elderly fall into poverty, or borrow more to preserve the social system. Japan chose the second option. Preserve human dignity first. Do the financial math later. But Japan borrowed in a way no one else did. It didn't borrow from the world. It borrowed from its own people. Japanese banks bought Japanese government bonds. Japanese pension funds bought Japanese government bonds. Japanese insurance companies bought Japanese government bonds. Domestic money financed domestic debt. No dependence on international markets. No need for foreign trust. No fear of capital flight. That is why Japan carries enormous debt without collapsing, because the Japanese trust Japan. 5. Japan's debt spiral. Why debt didn't kill it. Japan's debt spiral exists because of one extraordinary condition: extremely low inflation, even deflation. For more than 2 decades, prices barely rose, money didn't lose value, savings were not eroded. In that environment, holding cash was not dangerous. Buying government bonds was nearly risk-free. Low yields were acceptable because purchasing power was preserved. In other words, deflation and social trust equals citizens willing to lend to the state long-term. Japan's debt spiral did not rely on foreign investors. It relied on domestic savings and social trust. This is something most other countries simply cannot replicate. 6. When inflation returns, the spiral reverses. Japan's debt model only works when prices are stable. Because wages grow very slowly, people live off past savings. Government bonds yield very little. When inflation returns, living costs rise, wages fail to keep up, savings are eroded. The elderly begin withdrawing savings to survive. The young cannot accumulate savings at all. The money flow reverses. From lending to the state, to withdrawing just to live. At that point, government bonds lose natural buyers. The central bank must step in. New money must be created to keep the system running. The debt spiral shifts from socialized debt to monetized debt. This is the most dangerous phase. Not because collapse is immediate, but because the nation becomes immobile. 7. The price of stability. When a nation devotes its resources to maintaining pensions, healthcare, social welfare, what remains for the future shrinks every year. Less large-scale infrastructure investment, less breakthrough innovation, less room for high-risk entrepreneurship. The future is no longer built. It is merely preserved. The nation shifts from expansion thinking to preservation thinking. And when preservation lasts too long, evolutionary momentum dies. 8. Look at the young. You'll see the answer. Walk through Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto. You will see order, cleanliness, safety, perfection. But look into the eyes of young Japanese people. It's not that they lack talent, not that they lack ambition, not that they don't know how to dream. They know their country will not grow larger anymore, and they must set aside their own dreams to sustain the dreams of the previous generation. That is the quietest burden of an aging nation. 9. Final words. Japan did not fail. Japan did not collapse. Japan is simply the nation that reached the end of the road earlier than the rest of the world. It did not fall into chaos. It stopped within order, a society that is still clean, still safe, still perfectly functional. But the future is no longer being built. It is only being kept from breaking. Japan's story is not a loud warning. It is a silent mirror, reminding us that a nation can remain alive, yet no longer live in an expanding sense. And the final question is not for Japan. It is for each of us. If one day your country no longer opens a future, no longer promises growth, no longer carries a shared dream, what will you do with the 30 years of life still ahead of you?